Okay, so first of all, everyone who's here today in this webinar, hello. This is the fourth of a series of webinars that we organized as a global committee. My name is Soledad Mella, leader of the National Organization of Waste Pickers in Chile and of Red Lacre, which is composed of 18 countries. I also belong to the global committee organizing the webinar today, which is about a very serious issue for all of us waste pickers, linked to the EPR law and the accountability it imposes. This law implies many challenges for everyone, and it has begun to be implemented on a global scale. So we've been speaking about this issue with people from every continent, and we've been speaking about how we can be part of the conversation and of the policies regarding this extended producer responsibility law, also called inclusive recycling in Chile. It's quite an interesting process, and we think that each of you, each of us, must be accountable for what it implies. We need to have a negotiating table, not only among waste pickers, but also with the world of politics in each of the countries where this law is going to be enforced. It's important for us to decide and deeply assess this law about the inclusion of grassroots waste pickers around the world. We think that more than recognizing the waste pickers, we must include them, include the rubbish collectors, whatever you want to call them, because there are different names and terms in different places. That's why it's extremely important to listen and think about the different proposals that we have. That's why today we want to invite you to speak and participate, and especially to listen to the different experiences that the various guests today are going to tell us about. This is a space made up of the grassroots waste pickers, the people who have their hands in the waste, sorting it and picking it. So we're going to hear their perspective and listen to how important their participation has been throughout history in waste collection. This law should recognize and include grassroots waste pickers, and that's what we want to talk about today, what our vision is for that and how we can participate in the political discussion about this law, and also think about how we can make proposals as to how to implement policy in each of our countries. So without further ado, and as the moderator, I'm going to introduce the various guests that we have. We have FACCYR from Argentina, who are the organizers in Argentina. One of our colleagues called Jackie is going to present the key points regarding the inclusion of waste pickers in this law. Our colleague Jonathan Castillo is also going to intervene, as is Macarena, who is head of FACCYR. So she's also going to be with us during the first hour of the conversation we're going to have. So I'm going to pass the mic on to Jackie. So please, Jackie, go ahead. You can make your presentation, which can last a maximum of 8 minutes, so that we respect our schedule and we can allow people to ask questions and receive answers. Thank you.
Bueno, en principio, buenos días a todas, a todos y a todes. La verdad que
Good
estamos
morning, everybody.
felices.
The truth is that we are really delighted. I'm going to try to give us a brief introduction, and I'm going to talk about the battle that brought us to where we are today, to this webinar, where we're beginning to discuss where we come from. Literally, we come from the Republic of Argentina. In 2015, the government changed and basic laws began to be discussed again. And it's a discussion that has been taking place for over 20 years. So the FACCYR, which is the waste pick organization in Argentina, was very strong at that point. We were influencing all the policies that could affect our sector negatively. And thanks to the efforts made by many of us, we managed to stop something that was going to negatively impact us. Luckily, we realized it was happening. We created a very strong campaign, which we called Recycling in Our Hands. And as that was happening, we received, there was a threat to privatize our sector. And this is something that's happening on a global scale. And we managed to become an example for the rest of the world. From then on, we did three essential things under that logo of recycling in our hands. We defended our sector against privatization. And during this battle, unity was extremely important. Then we created a draft law, which is what we are discussing today. So waste pickers created, drafted this law, and we spoke about it in Congress. And we said that no EPR law could be created without our participation. We suspended a neoliberal project which excluded us completely from the entire process. It was not easy to overcome because we were literally watching as the different companies and businesses tried to create these packaging laws without taking us into account, despite our participation for the past 20 years. Then we also launched a campaign about our work on a national level. And we accepted the challenge of carrying out this work, of spreading awareness all over Argentina to tell everybody who we are, who are the thousands of waste pickers associations within or without FACCYR, what it means to be a waste picker in Argentina. We delved into this awareness, this idea of creating awareness, and the idea of sorting materials. And we thought about the links and connections that we can make with our neighbors in Argentina. We tried to bring this movement to the entire nation. And after that, in 2016, we started to say that this conversation cannot take place without us. And I want to say again that we are extremely proud that a law that doesn't include us has not been passed. And that was thanks to our protests and battle, despite the fact that some liberal environmental sectors criticized us. And now, thanks to that, we have a more developed project, but we understand that this project is something that was built over time by resisting neoliberal policies that want to exclude us, leaving us out in those open air landfills. So we resisted locally. But in 2018, we also organized an international meeting here in GABA where we made proposals with other colleagues, delegates from all over the world. And we decided to create a non-negotiable list about inclusive EPR. And that's essential because we were meeting and talking about this at a global level, not only on a national level. Our colleagues in the grassroots with whom we've been building relationships for years took on the accountability that this implies, and we decided to create Globalrec. So I'm going to try to finish up because time is short. I just wanted to give you a short introduction of why the process that happened in Argentina is so historical and how waste pickers took responsibility of participating and fighting against that public policy and fighting for a public policy that does include us waste pickers in order to take care of our common home. We insist that we don't want an EPR that thinks about recycling in a neoliberal way. What we need is all governments to participate and discuss this together so that companies are not allowed to do whatever they want, because that is to promote their lack of responsibility. And it is also to exclude not only our sector of waste pickers, but also society as a whole. So we want a state that's present, that can implement and make all these companies like Pepsi and Coca-Cola respect the law. As we always say, our recycling hands are the ones that literally take care of our common home. If there is no environmental justice, there will be no social justice and vice versa. And that's why we, the nation of recyclers, are never going to stop until we achieve this justice. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. Before we continue, I just want to say that we have a limited amount of people in the webinar, which is 100 people, and we've reached this limit. So whoever speaks Spanish and can follow the webinar on our live on Facebook, I'm going to send the link on the chat so you can join on Facebook and watch the webinar in Spanish. So we have other room for other people to join the webinar and see it in Portuguese, English, or French, the other languages. So whoever can move to Facebook to watch in Spanish, I left the link on the chat here on Zoom. So you can just click it and keep following the webinar through Facebook Live. Thank you.
Edu, permíteme decir, esto es principalmente para
Edu, let me say this is specifically for our colleagues from the Federation, because they are online now. Maybe they can move on to the Facebook network, because this has been a success and our next panelist, Cecilia, can't get into the webinar. So if some of you can move over to watch it on Facebook, that would allow us to give some space to our next speaker, guest speaker. Okay, I'm back now. I disconnected, but I'm back. Okay, so I wanted to say thank you to Jackie, a great leader in these battles, because it's clear that structure and fighting is key in order to move forward with our demands in terms of waste management. So we're a family of waste pickers who have resisted for many years, and we're trying to do the same thing now with the law in order not to be left out. According to my agenda, Caro, could you help me, please? Now we will have a presentation from Jonathan Castillo. So let's welcome our colleague from FACCYR, and at the end we'll have some time for questions. Okay, Jonathan, you can go ahead. Hello, good morning, everybody. How are you? I'm representing the Argentinian Federation of Waste Pickers, and I'm going to talk about the environmental and social issues. We all know what the environmental issue is, and we all know what open air landfills imply in poor neighborhoods. We know that it means water that is not clean, that ends up in our polluting our rivers.
Claro, alguien que se le sea el micrófono ahí.
Because COVID-19 not allowed
Si le
us.
decimos micrófono, por favor.
This
Edu,
man where they talk.
Okay, let's silence our mics, please. Eduardo, can we turn off his Friday's mic? Sorry, Jonathan. So we all know that sometimes we can't collect packaging and lots of recyclable materials which end up in our oceans. We think that packaging needs to be more environmentally friendly and easier to recycle. We are all aware that there are many types of packaging that are hard to classify because they have 5 different materials. So that implies a lot of non-recognized work.
Son recursos naturales que
And these are natural resources which are not renewable. It's not easy to come across them. We may never find them again. Then this derives in a series of social problems in the municipalities of our countries. I can speak of Argentina because that's the experience I have. There are people surviving off recyclable materials everywhere. But in most of those cases, there is no economic recognition of this work. We carry out our work and we are convinced that it must be recognized just like any other job. So we need to say that our job is actually much more valuable than, say, someone who sweeps the street, because we are actually reusing materials that otherwise would end up in our oceans, and it's something that happens to us everywhere. We know that we are behind in this issue and that it's very hard to manage it if there are no resources. So that's why we want to create a recycling system that is socially inclusive. There are about 160,000 of us in Argentina. Sorry, I think I skipped one point. That's about the diagnostic, but yeah, in Argentina, there are 160,000 waste pickers. And within our federation, we have about 20,000 members. So that's about 15% of the total number of colleagues who live off recycling. And only 20,000 of them are organized and have some kind of recognition. So we need those colleagues who are not organized. We need them to also be recognized. We need to have policies thought out for those people.
Nosotros tenemos que ser más insistente en esto, ¿no?
We need to insist on this. We need to insist on this with the environmental offices, and we need to spread awareness among our citizens about the importance of this work. All those materials that people don't know what to do with is managed by a colleague, another citizen. Who ends up touching this piece of glass or paper with that has been thrown in the street, and not everybody is willing to do this. So it's a job that has dignity, but its conditions do not have that nature of dignity. There are municipalities that don't classify, don't differentiate their waste from their recyclable materials, and they don't create a policy to be able to give that dignity to our sector, because our colleagues need materials and resources to be able to collectively sell the materials. And of course, it would really benefit us economically if that were to be done. So we want to insist that we need to recognize all of those colleagues, because the recognition that they currently receive is extremely low. The results are very negative. We managed to achieve way more with very few resources than the municipalities ever did. We're collecting about 7% of the total volume of what should be recycled on a national level. So over 97% still needs to be structured within a system, because we speak as a federation. These are our estimates, but there is not a register of how many colleagues actually work on the national level, what their exact conditions are. As a federation, we know what these conditions are, and what we do know is that they have a need for this recognition. But we need something to establish what is needed in Ushuaia, for example. It would be really good to carry out this diagnostic, and it would be fantastic to have a law that actually implements this. Producers need to be made accountable for the packaging that they produce, because the packaging isn't only valuable when it has a product inside it. The producer thinks that once the product isn't in the packaging is useless, but it doesn't do at least the minimum in order to reuse that material and turn it into a post-consumption package. I think all of us who are here know that a black bin bag can be reduced in 20% in order to be reused. There's very few materials that cannot be reused. There are packages that cannot be recycled and do simply pollute. That is all they do. A plastic bottle takes 1,500 years to degrade. We also understand and know that almost 50% of recycling plants in the country are inactive because resources aren't assigned to their maintenance. And in most municipalities, there's very little thought given to recycling processes. And statistics show that waste collection levels are very low, that the levels of success are very low, that the plants are not efficient, that the maximum level of reuse of materials is like 10%. We're running out of time, so all I want to say is that we have to continue fighting because we're suffering from hunger, we're suffering from a lack of labor conditions. And as I said earlier, our job should be a job with dignity, and our aims for this law are for packaging to be easier to recycle and more environmentally friendly. And that's what we're trying to achieve for most packaging to be recyclable. So packaging that is not recyclable should be rethought of so that it can be inserted into this recycling system. The specific aims are the ones you can see on screen to prevent and minimize the negative impact of packaging on the environment. So we need to ensure that these packagings don't end up in rivers. The second aim is to reduce the amount of packaging. There are plastics that cannot be recycled. They simply can't be used. So it would be good if we rethought how these materials are produced. Then we want to reinforce waste management systems that already exist in the different municipalities. We need to create a recycling system that is accountable for its actions, that uses the tools and attitudes necessary to make it work. You have no idea the kind of magic that we have to come up with in order to make our system work with no resources. So it's possible. The next thing we want is to make the private sector responsible for its actions. The private sector needs to take responsibility for what it produces. All that packaging must be recyclable. There is a minimum percentage that one of our colleagues is going to tell you about soon with more detail. But it's true because in the private sector, producers only think about production and economic benefits. But what happens after that? Nothing. There's no further follow-up. We also want to include our colleagues who work in this sector. And lastly, promote the life cycle of these kinds of packaging. So to begin to think about how to do that, to take responsibility for these objects. Our common home won't be able to withstand this pressure for much longer if we don't begin to actually let everybody know that we need a packaging law, which will then imply a number of other issues. Thank you, Jonathan. Our time is quite short, so thank you for your intervention. I think it's essential to clear up that waste pickers and waste collectors, not only do we collect waste, we also reduce the environmental impact of these objects, which has not yet been recognized or valued at all in real terms. I'm going to invite Macarena Funes, who is a lawyer, to tell us what her vision is, what their vision is of the EPR law. Good morning, everyone. First of all, I wanted to thank you for this space. First of all, I'm going to let you know about everything we are able to include in our project with our colleagues from the Federation. My colleagues introduced how we came to the point of creating this draft bill. So I'm going to explain the technical aspect a bit more. The specific aims of the law are the ones our colleague told us about. One of the most important is that the law wants to declare waste management systems as essential services. The national waste management system will be made up of programs made to reinforce recycling and local management system, because we know that now it's the responsibility of the government. So we want that to remain as it is and to be reinforced by a separate set of systems. The law also says that all workers, all producers should register the packaging that they produce. So they should register what these packagings are made of, how many do they produce, and what materials do they use. And according to that register, we would implement a fee which will depend on a series of criteria, which are its recyclability, the recyclability of each packaging, the environmental impact of the packaging, the recycled material it contains. So if I have something made out of recycled material, that packaging will reduce the fee that we're proposing. And so will eco-designed products or packaging. This kind of design would help make it easier to recycle. The important thing about this fee is that it is an environmental fee. In Argentina, we have a dangerous waste fee, and it's environmental because it's not a tax, it's a fee, which is generated because we have a constitutional right to a safe environment. The aim is for this fee to appear when I create a package. If that packaging doesn't have a certain level of recyclability, if I can't ensure its reuse, it's going to impact the environment negatively. And this fee ensures that the environment is not damaged. It's a minimum budget law, so it will establish a minimum level of protection for the environment. And what we calculated is that it must not impact the final price of a product in over 3%. There is a limit of 0.6% of the value of the packaging. This fee will be turned into a fund for the management of inclusive recycling and packaging. The idea of this fund for the management of packaging and inclusive recycling is to be supported by two different government systems. So municipalities will have to present management plans that respect the aims included in the law and will include a plan to integrate the workers who are already working, doing these tasks.
Y monitoreo de la autoridad de aplicación, que lo que estamos queriendo es que sea el Ministerio de Ambiente y Desarrollo Sostenible, porque entendemos que es el ministerio con más competencia sobre el tema.
This plan will always provide waste pick of the environment, which is knowledge about this issue. So I'm going to summarize this. But the idea is to ensure that there's equipment, logistics, transport, commercialization, to improve the work conditions of waste pickers. And all of these benefits will become a part of this trust. So the actors involved will be the Ministry of the Environment and Sustainable Development, the producers of packaging who will pay the fee, the municipalities who will have to implement the law and who will have to present the management plans, and finally cooperatives and waste pickers. So those are the five main actors who will participate in this law. Jonathan, I don't know if you want to tell us about the benefits of the draft bill.
Los beneficios que puede llegar a tener la ley en conjunto.
The benefits that this law could provide is that for municipalities, they will be able to obtain specific concrete figures. We are asking for figures, but they just simply don't exist. And that's because there's no register. So it would be very helpful if the municipalities had those data. And that's how we could recognize all the colleagues who work in this sector. If there is a political will, it can be done. But we're always told that there are no resources, that there's no money, and that's why we are always left out and always left behind. And that's still the situation we're in, but I don't know if I answered your question. Yeah, no, I was just asking what we expect from the law. What are the benefits, the environmental benefits that our law will offer us? It's somewhere that we can incentivize a lower production of this kind of packaging, or to promote the creation of packaging with materials that already exist in the market. The social benefits is, of course, first of all, the inclusion of waste pickers, the improvement of working conditions for waste pickers. As Jonathan said, today, waste pickers use their hands for work. They have no machinery or logistics, which is something that they need, and yet they still work more efficiently than any other system. And then, of course, the economic benefits. As Johnny said, one of our main problems and obstacles is that there is never money to manage waste or to include waste pickers. So the idea is to use EPR, because the producer is the actor who makes money by putting this packaging on the market. So the aim is to create a fund, a trust, that can compensate these impacts. Macarena, do we have time? I think we do. Thank you for your interventions. It's clear that when we speak about investing resources by different countries, resources are badly distributed. And one of our international demands is linked to an investment in machinery, technology, infrastructure, logistics, which is also important for us, transport, in order to be able to get from one place to another. If we receive those resources, 30 the levels of 30 or 40% of what we recycle would quickly climb to 60 or 70%. So I think Macarena's presentation gives us a clear vision of how EPR can be a part of waste management, and that we should also participate in its creation. Could I add something? Sorry, yeah, it should be brief. Yeah, I just wanted to talk about a situation of before and after. First, we have workers working by themselves, not organized, and now we have a group of organized waste pickers. Unfortunately, independent waste pickers can't do many things that organized waste pickers can. That's all I wanted to say. Thank you, Jonathan. That's absolutely true. Organizing, unity is what has allowed us to make more visible what our demand is and how it's linked to the environment and how the management of this waste impacts waste pickers. As I said, it's impossible to move forward without allies, and one of our best allies on the global level were the different environmental actors. We have colleagues and friends. So I'm going to invite Cecilia Allen to give her presentation. Thank you, Sole. Good morning, everyone. Thank you, FACCYR, for the invitation. I'm from GAIA. GAIA is an international network that works with, well, it has 130 members in Latin America and over 800 members in the world. We promote zero waste policies with a social and environmental justice perspective, and we've been working for many years. So first of all, the packaging law is 20 years late. It should have been implemented 20 years ago, and we've been fighting for that. So I think the promotion that the waste pickers are giving it is very ambitious, and I hope that this time we do actually manage to achieve it. We also must take into account the context that our colleagues were describing. So apart from this context, there's the fact that there's a complexity in terms of the production of these materials, because we have more and more products made up of different types of materials which are harder to recycle. So I think the costs for municipalities and the technical complexities to collect and recycle these materials requires some order being imposed on these products so that they can actually, first of all, reduce, so we can reduce the production of these objects, and secondly, for everything that enters the market to actually be possible to reuse safely. So we need a law on packaging, and we need to think about the role of producers. So we would really welcome a packaging law.
La red, digamos, quería hacer algunas consideraciones en base a la experiencia que nosotros venimos viendo.
I wanted to talk also about our experience about EPR. We all know EPR is very well known to us, and we've been talking about this concept in different countries. In Europe, we've been talking about it for years, and then we started seeing it in the rest of the world. So I think it's important to have some EPR politics applied in the Congress, and to have different draft laws that maybe they are based in the European model, but they should be adapted to our country. So we should think how we're going to write this law, and it should be adapted to our country, as I said. So I want you to say a few things. First of all, we have to give some recognition to the pre-existing circuits, recycling circuits. Here, they are mainly based on the waste pickers' work, and we should avoid creating different circuits that could be competing against the waste pickers. So we should be a way to improve waste pickers' livelihood. The law should reinforce the financing and the conditions. It should increase the access to work and social security conditions also. We should expand the circuits and increase the financing, but we think we should have an EPR law or an EPR politics that aims to a zero waste, or at least that allows a better recycling and a safe recycling, because especially today we see different toxic products due to the different components of the plastics, and this is a problem to our sector that manages this waste. Therefore, the packaging shouldn't contain any toxic products, and the packaging should be recyclable. So there is a lot of work in order to redesign this kind of packaging that we have in our markets. And I think it's interesting also to say that the EPR, it's not a law, it's a principle, a political principle that aims to create a responsibility amongst producers. So I think it's interesting to think about the possibility of having this responsibility, maybe creating a tax or a fee to these non-recyclable products. It could be good to have this kind of measure, and they are doing it already in some countries. And here in Argentina, we've seen also they've forbidden some kind of materials like plastic straws and other kind of materials, plastic materials especially. It is also important to establish an individual responsibility to the producers. This means that the producers who create a better packaging could have, for example, less cost or pay less fees than those that continue creating toxic and non-recyclable packaging. This could be a better way to start changing the materials that are produced. We should continue improving also the recycling quality and collection of waste. There is a key point also in a system that aims to manage better the waste, and it is to to stop the possibility of incinerating any materials. This incinerating process is competing against the waste pickers, and we should avoid to have any materials going to the incinerating process. We should always aim to have 100% materials recycled. We should stop incinerating materials, thinking that they could be used to create fuel or other products. All waste should be recycled and not incinerated. A couple of two more key points. Yes, sorry. Yes, I'm going to finish. A couple of key points only. We should guarantee the social participation in this ruling, and we should also strengthen political ways and political structures that allow the waste speakers to continue their work. And of course, the EPR system should be mandatory. We've seen, of course, companies that say they're applying an EPR system, but of course they change it to their ways and they adapt it to what they prefer or not, or to what they want to do. So this system should be very transparent and should be mandatory. It should, for example, say how many packaging we have in our market, how the recycling is guaranteed. So there are a few criteria that should be mandatory and should be written. And I hope we could finally have a law for the packaging, and we could expand this recovery that waste pickers sector has been having till now. Thank you, Cecilia. I think one of the most important things is that GAIA and other organizations are working in the political discussions about packaging, and Chile has, for example, said no to the plastic bags for one single use. And we should always think about creating more resources. So that's what we want to do. And of course, we should always aim to no single-use plastics, of course. So thank you for your presentation, especially about incineration. And of course, we think this incineration process has nothing to do with sustainability. So thank you very much. About the private sector, it is very important to us to be in the decision-making discussions. So I want to ask Don José Luis that I pass to the Argentinian chamber for plastics. Thank you, Soledad. And thank you to the organizers of this series of webinars. And as you were saying, it is a shame that when the private market meets, you're not invited to the discussions. But of course, we are all working here. We're all having a discussion together. And like that, I can give you the point of view from the industry of plastics. I'm going to share my screen, if you allow me. I'm the executive director from the plastics industry. Can you see my presentation? Can you hear me well? Most of the things I'm going to say have been said before. And one of the things is that it's been a long time. We've been waiting for a law, a waste management law. The chamber, the Argentinian chamber for the recycled plastics has a first aim, that is to promote the collection and the recycling of plastics. So packaging are the first thing, our main aim. And the first thing we should do is the packaging law. We've been saying that we have this draft law for more than 20 years and we still don't have this law. This is a brief graphic about the circular economy. You have the design, we have the production, distribution, consumerism, collection, recycling, and the last point, and we see they're both linked here, the collection and the recycling, that are the people who are here present in this meeting. So in order to close that circle, we have to have the collection and the recycling. Without that, we won't have the circular economy. We talk at some point about prohibition, and we don't like to install any prohibition. We always want to ask producers to be responsible. What is our objective? Our objective is to overcome this situation. We should change that previous situation into this one that you can see here. Clean, safe materials that could be used to create other products. So how do we do in order to overcome this issue? The waste come from different places. Urban waste from houses, and then the industrial waste. The waste from the houses, we can find different ones. We have packages that are at least 45% of the total of the waste. And then we have other kind of waste that are furniture and others. But of course, packaging is at least 50% of the total of waste. So it is extremely important that the EPR should be focused on the packaging. We all know the 4 R's: to reduce, to reuse, recycle, and to recover energy. In Spanish, we have 4 M's. We have different kind of waste. All of us generate approximately 1 kilo of waste per day, but we generate different kinds of waste. So that's what we say. That's what we say. There are different types of waste, but how can we manage them? We should go to 4 kind of actions. First, we should classify the waste. There should be a quantity, enough quantity of waste and quality, and it should be a continuing process. This is what the recycling industry should have. This is basic. We always need enough quantity of materials that are well classified and that are of quality. This is very important for a bakery, for example. They can ask for 10 packs of flour from a good quality, but here it's very different. We work differently here. You know that in our sector, the raw material doesn't come from a factory. So how do we manage to create quality materials and with enough quantity? We do it through the waste pickers. They are the ones that are in charge of collecting, classifying the materials, and they make sure there is enough quantity and they are of good quality. So it is important that the waste pickers are strong in their activity. This is an example of the recycling industry in Argentina. They have 500,000 tons of recycled materials per year, but last year they produced 250,000 tons per year. So there is like 40% that is not produced. They produce 2 kinds of materials, raw materials or final products. So how do we do to increase their participation, their production, because they are working at 50% of their capacity? The problem is that they can't maintain the conditions that the industry asks to create all the products. We see then that the recycling industry could produce double if they had double materials, for example, better collected and sorted materials. But these would need more people working in the sector and some financing. What are the benefits of the recycling? Of course, using less of natural resources, less energy consumption. What I mean is to create a product, a recycled product, we use 80% less than if we create that product for the first time. We also have less CO2 emissions. And of course, we send less materials to the incineration or to the landfills. Economical benefits are less will buy less virgin plastics used for the first time. And we are also sending recycled plastics products. We collect, we classify, and we create a new product that we can export. That means sales. Yes, of course, I'm finishing. Then we have social benefits. The manpower in Argentina in 2020 was 2,500 people, the labor, direct people working, but 7,500 indirect labor. And if we talk about the packaging law, what are the aims of this law? It should increase the value of the recycled products. It should increase the benefits from the recycling, and it should increase the use of recycling designs of products that are recycled. Of course, materials should come to the industry with quality and quantity, but also with social benefits for the waste pickers. In conclusion, we have different resources, but we are all part of this chain. The citizens can separate the waste. The authorities can make a different collection. The cooperatives can help to the collection too. The industry can use the quality materials in order to create new products, recycled products. And we, as citizens, can always choose different products that contain recycled materials. So this is what I had to say, and I hope I didn't talk too much. Thank you, Jose Luis. I think it's important what you say about the recycling industry. For us, it's extremely important that all the politics about recycling should be applied in all the regions. This is one of our aims, because everything is centralized now, and that is a problem for us in the north and in the south of our country. And this is what happens in every industry. Everything is centralized in the cities, and sadly, we cannot reach to everywhere, to all the regions. We can only collect around 50% of the waste due to this. So the industry has its place to improve the system, also improving the machinery and improving the materials. So in order to continue with the webinar, we are live in YouTube and Facebook. And as we were saying, this is also a political issue. And we are here to talk about the different laws, the different draft laws that could be written in order to improve the situation in our planet. And it is important the participation of all of us. So that's why we wanted to invite Daniela, National Deputy, to talk here to us. Thank you.
Bueno, Soledad, muchas gracias. Muchas gracias por la
Thank
invitación.
you, Soledad. Thank you for inviting me. I think it's extremely important to have this kind of discussions at an international level, so we can all share our perspectives and we can all talk about our common problems and our possible solutions. We are here building one of the most important laws for the circular economy in our country, but I also think in the whole region. This law, or this discussion about the law, this draft law, talks about environment. So we foster the recycling, of course, because it asks the companies to be responsible of what they do. And of course, it strengthens and gives the needed importance to waste pickers, and it creates new jobs in this circular economy and this new model that we are fostering.
Se construye a partir de haber transitado uno de los momentos más complejos de la historia.
So this organization comes from the fact that we're going through one of the most difficult moments historically. And listening to all of you, I realized that it's important for these networks to be international. Recently, I was at a meeting in Rome for pre-COP, and the truth is that it's essential to express the Global South's voice in terms of the environment and the conversation around climate change and climate crisis, because otherwise our history of oppression and colonialism will be repeating itself, even conceptually. That's why we think that this conversation about the law is also transcendental in understanding the lifestyle and the idea of a good life in the Global South. So I want to add something that I consider important before going on to more technical details about the law, and we hope to discuss this year. And what I want to say is that we're experiencing a global situation of structural inequality that makes most of the people in the world be vulnerable. Only a minority has the accumulated privileges over the rest of the population. And I'm saying this from an ideologically perspective because I admit that I'm quite an optimist and a Peronist. So we aspire to full employment. It's part of our identity. And there's a production model to lead us to where we are, which is based on extractivism, individualism, the patriarchy, something that it's a model that is exclusive and promotes poverty. And despite our work to create full employment, our reality shows that in most countries, a great part of the population, especially in the global south, are excluded from the formal economic system. So the manpower constituted by this huge sector of the population is not reflected in the formal economy. So we need to give context to this law on packaging. And to do that, we cannot forget about assessing the structural inequality suffered by the populations who have historically been oppressed. So we need to start from there in order to understand the need to co-build draft bills and regulatory frameworks that allow us to then create public policy that, first of all, impose the creation of a more just society that is based on social inclusion, that is based on common sense, that thinks about the notion of the environment. What do we mean when we talk about environmental issues? What happens with that sector of society who constantly needs to find a means to survive, to feed their children? We can't take on circumstantial roles without speaking about the structural inequality that exists in our countries. And I think this is going to an opinion that other colleagues will share, I think that this draft bill is so important because it directly focuses on trying to eradicate this problem that we're speaking about. So this is a law that we owe to ourselves, but it must have the participation of these sectors, that is, the communities who are going to be impacted by this public policy, because we understand that it will allow the creation of access to rights, dignity, and equality. On the other hand, we must also take on the mission to talk about redistributing wealth. Now, our colleagues were very clear, but I want to focus a bit more on the law itself. So I want to think about how the law was built. It was worked on by the Ministry of the Environment, but the protagonists in its creation were the waste pickers, the urban waste collectors, especially those who are already organized. What our colleague said is very important. It's very the life of an independent waste collector is very different from that of those who are part of an organization, such as our colleagues in LMT or FACCYR in the Federation. These organizations and unions of waste pickers were the protagonists. They actually must be the protagonists, because this conversation is going to take place within a legal context. So it's fundamental to have this law because it will solve an issue that we have with waste, especially in urban areas like where I am from. I'm going to some context of waste per day. That's what we create. And half of that, at least, end up in open air landfills. And that negatively affects the health of the people who live there. The vulnerable sectors are always the ones who suffer the most. And this is due to that structural inequality.
Con lo cual,
And a high percentage of this waste is created by the type of packaging that we're talking about. When we, sorry, we need to finish off. Yeah, I think it's fundamental to think about the collection, because we think they should be destined to systems that include waste pickers. The aim will be to create an industrial model based on the circular economy that Jose Luis was mentioning. It's not something utopic or something impossible. It's something that we can establish. The first step is to talk about this packaging law with you as the protagonist. That's it for me. Thank you very much for allowing me to participate. Thank you, Daniela. I think one of your main points is about how this law is cross-cutting across a number of sectors. And of course, the economic aspect linked to this law, which has globally affected climate change and the climate crisis. It's also important to think, as you said, about those extractive models and economic systems that have impacted our country so much. It is essential to include those issues in the conversation, include what you said about having to change the existing systems in the world in order to solve this problem. So we're going to move on with our next guest. It's important to have a political view. That's why we're going to listen to Leonardo Grosso, politician in the Commission for Natural Resources. Thank you, Soledad. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. Thank you for organizing this event, which has the aim of building a cross-cutting vision of the issues that we face, not only in each of our countries, but as humanity as a whole. We're on the edge of the point of no return. We know that our production model has led us to this point, and we urgently need to create and look for solutions to those problems. Every state in the world has ended up taking measures to manage the crisis climate, which has led us to face pandemics such as the COVID-19. But apart from that, as Daniela was just saying, this weekend we were at a meeting about climate change, and whole cities and countries are warning that they may completely disappear if the planet keeps heating, if the temperature keeps rising on the planet, if nothing is done. So it's very important to generate this debate. I think Argentina, in terms of recycling and experience, has huge contributions to make. And what Jackie and Jonathan were talking about show that experience. Likewise, this law, which is the initiative of waste pickers in Argentina. Some time ago, one of the main Argentinian newspapers, which is one of the most influential, talked about the main ecological problems in the world. And one was rubbish. That's what they called it. And there were some interesting figures, like the fact that there are over 5,000 open air landfills in Argentina, that Argentinians or the residents of this country produce over a kilo of waste per day, and within that waste, 30% is made up of packaging. If we talk about home waste, over 60% is made up of packaging. There's huge amounts of waste created per year in our countries, and it mentioned that only 6.9% of that packaging is actually recovered. And it did not mention waste pickers at all. It didn't mention collectors or the workers who work in this sector. It didn't mention our colleagues who take the responsibility for recovering that 7% of waste collected, their contributions to a more sustainable world. I think that what's happening in Argentina today, Daniela and I have the responsibility, along with other senators, to discuss the minimum budgets available for packaging management. So we have to take on the responsibility to sustain and promote the participation of waste pickers and waste collectors. As we said, figures mean nothing if people are not involved. Sustainability and ecology can only work if the workers from those sectors are involved. So I think that's a contribution that Argentina can make as well. We're in the process of discussing this minimum budget for the environment law, which was an initiative from these communities of waste pickers, which is very strong in our country. And that's why we think this conversation is extremely important, and I wanted to put that in context. As to what my colleagues were saying, when she was talking about the 50,000 workers who work in the recycling sector, if we think that 6.9% of the waste is collected and there are 50,000 workers, how many jobs could we create if we managed to spread, reinforce, and support not only the existing workers, but by creating a new task force? And that could be a way to solve two problems. One is the care of our common home, the environmental issue, and the other is unemployment, which is directly linked to our economic extractivist system that excludes such a great part of the population. So I think this is one of the main points that we need to think about with this law. Our colleagues told us a bit about it, but one of our main points to put forward is for producers to register the packaging that they create and to have this fee. For every $1 million collected, there's a 40,000 jobs created. So that's another way to look at it, and it is a way to create a more sustainable world, both economically and ecologically. The law also proposes the creation of a trust of local and national programs. We need to think about this always in terms of our waste workers, because there's the potential to allow us to improve and increase our recycling capacity in our country, and that's central. When we talk about the working conditions of our colleagues, we need to think about what equipment they need, how these programs can increase and improve work capabilities. We need to make municipalities responsible for supporting the reintegration processes. Jose Luis from the Chamber of Recycling was talking about the advantages that this could generate for the economy overall. And this has to be put on the table because the main conversation about this proposal, why waste pickers had to resist the incineration model that our previous government was pushing, why they had to resist a model that excluded them. We have to understand that that is not only a legal issue, as Cecilia was saying, but it's got to do with the principles that guide our state's policy, and it's got to do with EPR, because our capitalist society always targets the most vulnerable sectors in terms of what they do with the materials. What do the workers from the popular economy do with those social plans? And they're always targeted, and they're always attributed that responsibility. But on the other hand, companies are not being made accountable for the production of these millions of bottles that they don't even think about where they end up, and when they actually end up in our cities, in our rivers. I live a kilometer and a half away from a sanitation center, which is actually a place where waste from 27 neighborhoods are buried. Buenos Aires is the place in Argentina, is the only place in Argentina which buries its waste in another district without paying any fees on that or taxes. So that shows how this model is absolutely not viable. There's a huge surface in our district that cannot be developed because that's where waste is buried. So clearly we need to find a new model. I had a load of other points to make. Yeah, sorry, you have to finish up. Yeah, I will, yeah. I also think it's fundamental to talk about the aims that the law proposes to prevent and minimize the negative impact of those packaging, to reduce the amount and production of these packages, to reinforce integral waste management systems, to strengthen and make producers responsible for what they produce, and recognize the workers from the popular informal economy, the waste collectors, because it's important to say that in our Latin American countries, the capabilities of recycling that our cooperatives create informally in our neighborhoods are much stronger than the capabilities that any business or recycling service or state service can create. In our countries, state management is limited. Often that lack of state capability is compensated by social movements and social organization. And recyclers are the clear example of how limited states are and how the informal sectors have a great capability to fill that void. The state was late, and now we have the chance to fill that gap. This is what we have to debate in Congress. We have to include as many experiences as possible. But I think that we shouldn't delay this too much longer, because the state is always late. We are late at Congress to this debate because it's extremely urgent to be able to move forward with this legislation. I'm committed to do it. We're going to work to do so as much as we can. And I want to insist that the big companies who have a public status, who can say that they're in favor of it, who say that they're going to support it, then end up building lobbies to avoid it. So we can't allow that to become an obstacle for us to create this law, to avoid and detain this economic model of exclusion and lack of employment. Hopefully this law will contribute to the building of a new reality, which we really need, because now is the time and we can't continue to be late. Thank you.
Leonardo Grosso. La verdad que pone en la mesa varios temas.
Thank you very much, Deputy Leonardo Grosso. I think you talked about some very important points about waste management, but also about the environment. And as you say, we're late, and we have to support this process. We have to support the waste pickers, but we're still on time to do so.
Y ver cómo vamos mejorando los escenarios que son tan importantes en términos de impacto medioambiental.
Let's see how we improve all the conditions of our colleagues. And it's also very important to take into account the environment, as the deputy was saying. We're talking about inclusion, about circular economy, and we were already the pioneers of this process, and that is very important. There are some questions in the chat, and Carol is going to read them. So some of you can answer the questions. Carol, thank you, Sole. We have two of the first questions. One from Plácido Silva. Maybe Daniela or Leo could answer them. He said laws are a tool to achieve an objective. They are not the solution. And the industry works faster than the states and the social and the society. It is important to include the plastics that are originating.
Es lo que el compañero está aportando, digamos, estamos
But
hablando.
are the different plastics polluting the same? Yes, I am going to answer. It is important always to talk about the possibility to adapt ourselves. And of course, we should take into account that there are lobbies that try to prevent some of these practices, even though these practices, these recycling practices, wouldn't prevent them to generate more benefits. But it's important to talk about crisis we are living, the COVID crisis, and the nowadays context. And of course, we are also militants, political militants, and we should create a new paradigm, a new way of producing, and the state, the government, should work with the different organizations and with the people. The state, the government should work with the different sectors, with the civil society, and we should be able, during this, to create a revolution, to change the model that we've been having till now. And I think everyone should think about this. I always see the popular sectors, the social movements, as a key point in order to change this model, to create this new revolutionary model in order to empower the peoples. The civil society should be the most important part of this system. They should be the cross-cutting point of this new system that should be co-produced, co-created, because it shouldn't be a public process without the participation of the civil society and of the sector. So that's where I think we should all work in a balanced system, I think.
Dale, gracias. Una otra pregunta que
Thank
tenemos.
you. We had another another questions that Carlos Briones. He wanted to know if the fee of the price of a recycled product would be less than a raw, first produced product. There are different factors that could lower the fees to these products. We take into account first the type of products, and the law tries to promote products made of recycled plastics. The price would be established taking into account the cost of recycling, and different other aspects, like what the damage they will do to the environment. So of course there are different factors included in order to create a price for a recycled product. Thank you very much, Caro. Are there any other questions? I think there was one from Carlos Briones. Yes, there is one more. He says, we should formalize all these in order to have the graphics of the collection of materials. How could we do these formal cooperatives? I understand. I'm not sure if what he asked is how the cooperatives could be formalized. The law established that cooperatives and regions should be included. The regions should reach the waste pickers that are not part of any cooperative, because the ones that are inside the cooperatives are already organized for a long time. And this is not the reality or the majority of all the waste pickers. So the idea is that regions and local authorities could reach the waste pickers that are not organized already. I'm not sure if I answered his question.
Después tenemos también una pregunta que me parece que puede responder desde la
We also have another question that maybe Jackie could answer. It's from Christian Alfonso. He says if he would like if the law talks about environmental education issues and actions. Yes. Yes, we've been talking about this. In Argentina, we have a law about environment education, and we propose to be part of it. And of course, it takes into account how to manage the house, and also it talks about how we create the waste. And we've been promoting for several years to minimize our waste. We think that we have in Argentina between 150,000 and 200,000 people working in the waste sector, and we hope that this law should include the environment education. We should have a unified law, and our main aim is to create a social revolution with environmental education that I hope it will be established in Argentina. Thank you very much, Jackie. I think you answered very well. And it has to do with all the issues and all the challenges we've been facing, and everything that fosters the recycling. We should always take into account that it's very important the possibility to make the producers that pollute pay more. And waste pickers have always been working with waste, and the producers should be in charge of their responsibility too. We had another panelist invited, but sadly he couldn't be here. He's invited to work with us in another moment. With us and with WIEGO, of course. And I want to thank everyone. There were some questions left, and we will try to answer them through the social media, Facebook, YouTube. And of course, we want to thank all of you that participated in this process. And we wanted to have a short reflection that I, as president of the Chilean waste pickers here, we are suffering different challenges. We're suffering different politics, different governments. We're suffering the climate change, but we've been talking during all this meeting about recognizing waste pickers' work. We've been talking about circular economy, about programs, about inclusion of the waste pickers. We've been talking about the intermediates, about the aggregators, and about the job that we do as waste pickers. We've also talked about fair price to our work. What we want to do is to have to collect less waste, but to quality waste that could be used, and that is paid at a fair price. There should be more financing into the waste management, but also in creating less waste. We should change the model. We should change the idea that incinerating is the solution, and that it could create benefits for the environment. We should change this. Everything should be based on the waste pickers, catadores, as they call them in Brazil. We should change the system. We should be responsible of our waste, of our products, and the climate change is here. We should be responsible of what we are doing now. We've been working for years. Waste pickers have been working for 40, 50 years in order to reduce the waste. But we have future generations. We will leave, but they will be here with us, and we should leave them a better planet, a cleaner planet, and a more fair society. I want to thank all of you, Caro, and all the panelists that have participated in this webinar. Should we open our cameras and take a picture, a last picture before we leave?
Listo. Está acá las fotos.
Done.
Gracias.
Thanks.
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us on this webinar today. As I mentioned at the very beginning, my name is Eduardo. I'm with Globalrec's communications team. Thank you, everybody who joined to watch and to speak. This is a part of our EPR global campaign, where we're trying to advocate and raise awareness to the importance of EPR, to the importance of the role of the waste pickers. And keep posted. We're gonna share the recording of this webinar in all of the languages that we had translation available, so French, Spanish, English, and Portuguese. And we have our next webinar next Thursday, next week, where we're gonna be talking about a case study from Oregon. We have some people from Oregon here today, so I'll see you next week. And keep following us on our social media. We have all of our contacts online on our website. We also created a dedicated website only for EPR, available in French, in Spanish, Portuguese, and English. I'm gonna leave the link here on the chat, so you can check the website for information, for publications, events, and everything EPR. Thank you so much again, and I'll see you soon on the next webinar, hopefully.